Within 6 months, the guitar player in my band went to prison for shooting a kid that came to do a drive-by in our house. Within a year, another very close friend of mine who I shared a birthday with was shot and killed in a street fight as he was out practicing hate and violence as I had taught him to do. And this is another example of how hating Jews affects the hater. When you blame Jews or anybody else for what's going wrong in your life, you're essentially throwing away your agency to actually look inward and do the work necessary to really solve those problems. And so go figure, the problems get worse and your life continues to spiral down the toilet. You continue to blame everyone else for it. And in your best case scenario, you're going to have a miserable failure of a life. That's the best case scenario when you hate Jews or any other people. So those 7 years were far and away the most miserable 7 years of my 55.
Thank you all so much for being here. Welcome. I'm Lily Rabinoff-Goldman. I'm the president and CEO here at JCC Greater Boston. We are all so happy that you're here this evening to join us for our speaker series, the Jonathan Saman Hot Buttons Cool Conversations. This series invites distinguished public figures to engage in conversation on thought-provoking and stimulating subjects of concern to the Jewish community and beyond. And tonight is no exception as we examine changing hate to hope, conversations from the front line. First, we welcome Arno Michaelis, speaker, filmmaker, author of My Life After Hate, and co-author of The Gift of Our Wounds. Arno draws from his lived experience as a former neo-Nazi to work as an exit peer specialist at Parents for Peace, helping to lead people away from violent extremist ideologies and to support their families. Mubin Shaikh is a former supporter of extremism who changed his ways following the 9/11 attacks. After spending 2 years of studying Arabic and Islamic studies in Syria, he self-de-radicalized and returned to Canada, where he was recruited to be an undercover operative with the Canadian Security Intelligence Service. He was also involved in counter-ISIS activities for the U.S. military. He is currently a counter-extremism specialist with Parents for Peace. And leading tonight's conversation is Dr. Miri Bar-Halpern, a clinical psychologist, director of trauma training and services at Parents for Peace, and lecturer in psychology at Harvard Medical School, also a Camp Kaleidoscope parent, which is what we really care about here at the JCC. Since the October 7th attack on Israel, Dr. Bar-Halpern has played a leading role in coordinating mental health responses for affected individuals and communities. She is also the co-host of the podcast Our Stories Matter, produced by the Trauma Informed Learning Alliance. And so now I'm going to hand things over to Miri. Thank you all so much for being here.
Hi, everybody. We always say it sounds like a joke having the three of us on the stage, former neo-Nazi, former jihadist, and an Israeli, walk into a bar. So I've never moderated a conversation between us, so this is new for me. So I'm going to let you into a conversation between the three of us, into our secrets, our inspiration. So we'll see how it goes. It might not go well. I'm just letting you know. I'm going to do my best. Let's start with some slides, just so you can get to know us. Arno, can you tell us the story of Parents for Peace?
Good evening, everyone. So grateful that you chose to spend your evening with us tonight. Parents for Peace was founded by an Afro-American Baptist family from Memphis, Tennessee, named the Bledsoes. Their eldest son, Carlos, was radicalized into a violent Islamist ideology while he was in college, and he was actually planning on bombing a synagogue. Baruch Hashem, that fell through, but his plan B, unfortunately, was to shoot up a U.S. Army recruiting station, which he did, and in the process, he murdered a U.S. service member. Carlos is in prison for the rest of his life. The family was devastated. Carlos's father, Melvin, who passed away last year, and his memory is a blessing to all of us as we do this work. We have him in our heart. And his sister, Monica, founded Parents for Peace as the resource they wished they had when they realized that Carlos was becoming radicalized. As it was, they weren't aware of his plans for violence. When they went to the police to ask for advice, the police were like, well, he's not doing anything illegal that we know of. We can't arrest him. When they went to college counselors and mental health professionals, they didn't know how to respond to extremism. So Parents for Peace was born out of this family's tragedy. And I would point out also that this, again, was an Afro-American Baptist family in Memphis that was devastated when their loved one fell under the influence of anti-Semitism. It's a very stark example of how anti-Semitism harms everyone, and everyone in society should be engaged in combating it. Today, we have a toll-free US and Canada-wide helpline at Parents for Peace that anyone can call if they're concerned about a loved one falling under the influence of any sort of violent extremist ideology. And we have an amazing intake team that fields those calls. When we have an instance where we see that someone is becoming radicalized, we do a formal extended intake and then assign that family to an exit interventionist and to an exit peer specialist. My job as an exit peer specialist is to engage directly with what we call individuals of concern. These are typically the loved ones that the families are calling about. Mubin, my colleague, is also an exit peer specialist. We coach families and individuals about the best ways to disengage from extremism. That's our core business at Parents for Peace. We're funded by public and private grants, so we provide these services pro bono to any family that needs them. We also do extensive training for law enforcement, mental health professionals, social workers, and educators regarding best practices in addressing extremism, early warning signs, and what we can do about it as a society.
That was perfect. By the way, we have another exit interventionist here in the room, Dr. Tal Nir, to join Parents for Peace, and we're very grateful for that. So our team is expanding, and the reason I'm mentioning that, other than the fact that she's here, is because we see a real problem, and there is a real need to expand those services. So, Arno, I'm going to continue with you, and if we can go to the next slide, let's get the video going.
So how did this little boy grow up to become the broken man who was screaming such hateful, violent things on stage? I've been doing this work I'm doing now since 2010. I actually went public with my story on the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. holiday of 2010. Thus, every year, the MLK holiday is my anniversary of doing this work. Doing this work for 16 years, I've traveled internationally, worked around the world in a field that's known as counter-violent extremism. In the counter-violent extremism space, I'm what's known as a former, as in a former violent extremist. My colleague here, Mubin, is a former Muslim in terrorist clothing, as he used to put it. Or it's the other way around, sorry. Terrorist in Muslim clothing. Important distinction. Of all the formers I know, and I know formers of every stripe, and my job at Parents for Peace is to create more formers, to create more former white nationalists. The majority of formers have an origin story that involves what they call in the mental health field adverse childhood experiences. I know a lot of formers who suffered horrific abuse of every kind imaginable as a child, be it emotional, physical, even sexual. A lot of formers grew up in extreme poverty and with extreme dysfunction and abuse in their homes. In my case, I'm a bit of an outlier. That happy little kid had a pretty idyllic childhood, honestly. Growing up and having the grace to have traveled around the world, I understand that there are probably literally billions of children on this planet who would feel like they won the lottery if they switched places with me as a kid. But nonetheless, underneath this idyllic facade of normalcy that I grew up with. I grew up in a nice house in a nice neighborhood. My parents were together. They both loved me very much. They let me know that at every turn. In fact, throughout my childhood, all the adults in my life would just fawn over me and be like, he's so wonderful. He's so gifted. He can do anything. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. But as I look back on my life, and I do so, you're familiar with the phrase Monday morning quarterbacking? So I do like Monday morning psychoanalysis on myself. And I look back at my childhood and I'm like, what went wrong and where and how did it lead me to become that person you saw screaming horrible, hateful things on stage? And what I believe is that there was dysfunction in my home. It was a little latent. It wasn't necessarily very acute, but the dysfunction had to do with my father's alcoholism. Now, when I say that, a lot of times people are like, well, dad was mean and abusive, and my dad was never mean. He was never abusive. My dad, to this day, he's not a mean drunk. He's a fun drunk. And that meant when I was a little kid and dad was drunk, we were going to light off fireworks in the backyard and shoot pistols in our basement. We had a pistol range in the basement. And that was a lot of fun for my dad and for me and for my little brother. Both of us were down there shooting with him as soon as we were old enough to hold a pistol. But it wasn't fun for my mom, who at times was working 2 jobs to keep our lights on and the bills paid in a nice house in a nice neighborhood. And I grew up just watching my mother deal with immense amounts of stress. Her relationship with my dad sucked. They were both not happy with the way life was unfolding. They fought a lot, and even though it was just verbal arguments, it was about finances and the stress, and I grew up seeing both of my parents suffer. I responded to that not like a good kid and saying, hey mom, hey dad, I love you, how can I help? I responded by distancing myself from both of them, which of course made my suffering worse. And I just withdrew from all these adults who showered me with praise and loved me very much. And I started passing my suffering on to other kids. There's a simple concept, and it's just that hurt people hurt people. I honestly believe that all animosity and hatred in humanity comes from suffering. If someone is happy and they have a sense of inner peace and they're well-adjusted, they really have no motivation to hate people and to hurt people. But when we're suffering and we've been through trauma and we haven't engaged with a healthy way to process that suffering, quite often we pass it on to other people. I do a lot of talks. I've done about 700 or 800 in the past 16 years. I do a lot of talks in middle schools and high schools, which I absolutely love. I feel like I learn more from those kids than they might learn from me. And in one such case, I'm up here going, hurt people, yada, yada, yada. And a 12-year-old girl raised her hand and she's like, Arno, not all hurt people hurt people. And I was like, oh, yeah, that's a really good point. And that's something that needs to be said when we discuss this concept of hurt people hurt people. Nowadays, I'm a Buddhist, and Buddhism 101 is if you're a human being living in this existence, you're going to suffer. It's just part of life. And fortunately for all of us, fortunately for humanity, the bulk of people who suffer don't pass it on to others. They find healthy ways to process that trauma and process that suffering. But for those of us who don't find healthy ways to process suffering, we have a tendency to pass it on to other people. So I started out as a bully on the school bus in kindergarten. I got a kick out of it. I felt a rush. I felt a high by disrupting the world around me. And I quickly became addicted to that antisocial behavior. And the more chaos I was able to cause, the more of a buzz I got. And this addiction, like all addictions, escalated. So I went from a bully on the school bus to fights in the schoolyard to breaking and entering to vandalism. When I was 14 years old, I started drinking myself. By the time I was 16, I was a full-blown alcoholic. I had been violent since I was a little kid. Violence was a normal part of my life. And hate was just another part of this rush that I was constantly chasing. Hate was just another substance to be addicted to. And I became addicted to hate shortly after I became addicted to alcohol. And being the son of an alcoholic, I was genetically predisposed to that. So I was an alcoholic the first time I sipped a beer when I was age 14. The hate came shortly after. I was exposed to white nationalist ideology through white power skinhead music in 1987. And this music told me that I was a white man and I had to fight for my race against this evil Zionist plot to kill all the white people on the planet Earth. Now, that should sound ridiculous to any thinking person, because it is ridiculous. But to 16-year-old Arno, who was addicted to antisocial behavior and addicted to offending people and shocking people, it was literally music to my ears. I started my own white power skinhead band with some skinhead buddies of mine. Our band drew every broken white kid in southeastern Wisconsin like a magnet. Pretty soon we went from 5 guys to 10 guys to 20 guys. And as we grew in numbers, our antisocial behavior on the street escalated. And as that behavior escalated, we brought misfortune upon ourselves by the bad decisions that we made. Within 6 months, the guitar player in my band went to prison for shooting a kid that came to do a drive-by in our house. Within a year, another very close friend of mine who I shared a birthday with was shot and killed in a street fight as he was out practicing hate and violence as I had taught him to do. And this is another example of how hating Jews affects the hater. When you blame Jews or anybody else for what's going wrong in your life, you're essentially throwing away your agency to actually look inward and do the work necessary to really solve those problems. And so go figure, the problems get worse and your life continues to spiral down the toilet. You continue to blame everyone else for it. And in your best case scenario, you're going to have a miserable failure of a life. That's the best case scenario when you hate Jews or any other people. So those 7 years were far and away the most miserable 7 years of my 55. I got out by the grace of God because it was exhausting to live like that. It's exhausting to hate people. It's exhausting to be an addict in any form. The entire process of addiction is exhausting. If you go to an AA meeting, everybody at that meeting is there together because they're sick and tired of being sick and tired. I was exhausted from not only being an alcoholic, but also from being addicted to hate. The exhaustion came from many directions. My entire life, I've loved pop culture. To this day, I'm a huge fan of TV, sports, music, and film. I loved all those things as a kid. As a white power skinhead, all of those things were forbidden because they were seen as Zionist propaganda to numb the minds of white people to make them easier to oppress. And again, as ridiculous as that sounds, that was my reality as a white nationalist. So I had to sneak around on Sundays to watch Packer games, not let my buddies find me. I'm from Wisconsin. I have it in my blood. And the main pop culture influence that was actually very damaging to my anti-Semitism was the TV show Seinfeld. I was active as a white nationalist in the early 90s when Seinfeld was on primetime, and it was just like the talk of the town. My girlfriend, who had been a skinhead longer than I was, she was getting burnt out, and she'd be like, I just want to hang around normal people. And I'm like, normal people are traitors. Ah! And she's like, I'm hanging out with normal people anyway. And that's how she was exposed to Seinfeld. And God bless this woman's courage, because she came home and she's like, Arno, you got to see this show. And I'm like, what's the show called? And she's like, it's called Seinfeld. And I'm like, Seinfeld, rah, Jews. And she's like, no, just watch it. You'll love it. And I believe there's some sexual coercion involved here. Like I wasn't going to get any unless I watched the show. Just kind of Seinfeldian in itself. And the first episode I watched, season 2, episode 2, the pony remark, it just struck me. And despite being as hopelessly goyish as anybody could possibly be, the Jewish humor just really vibed with me. This awkward discussion at the dinner table that this family had and all the chaos that ensued was like reminded me of my family. And so I became addicted to Seinfeld at this point. And anyone who loves Seinfeld knows that on a daily basis, if not an hourly basis, you don't go a minute without seeing a Seinfeld reference here and there. And so whether I'm having a marble rye or a bowl of soup or somebody's a high talker or a low talker or any of the infinite Seinfeld references you could. Yesterday we were at Beverly and our host had a pin on his jacket. He's like, "Why don't you have a pin on your jacket?" And I'm like, "Oh, nice one. The AIDS ribbon episode, awesome." And so loving Seinfeld like that and having all these moments of joy and laughter thanks to the genius of not only Jerry, but Larry David and all sorts of other Jewish people who are involved in the show. I felt that joy, but at the same time, I had this inner voice saying, like, what's wrong with you? What does Jerry Seinfeld get to live in your whiter and brighter world? If he does, do you think he's going to be very funny if you're out there killing all the other Jews? And the only answer to that was that I was full of it, that it was nonsense that I was believing. So daily Seinfeld references drove home how stupid and futile anti-Semitism was. But the most powerful sense of this exhaustion was when people I claimed to hate treated me with kindness. And I was very fortunate that during my 7-year involvement in white nationalism, there were people like a Jewish boss, a lesbian supervisor, Afro-American, Latino, and Asian coworkers who treated me with kindness when I least deserved it, but when I needed it most. And in doing so, they lit a beacon that led me from the darkest time of my life. I left hate groups in 1994. Being a man of extremes, I spent another 7 years in the rave scene after that, on the south side of Chicago, shaking my butt to house music with 3,000 people of every possible ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation, socioeconomic background you can imagine, and loving every minute of it. And it really was formative to learn that people could genuinely care for each other rather than genuinely hate each other. I started writing in 2007. I quit drinking in 2004. That was a big milestone for me. Haven't had a drop since then. Don't miss it one bit. But my past kind of came rushing back to consume me after the numbness of alcohol was gone. So that's when I started writing to try to sort that out. Went public with my story in 2010, as I mentioned. Joined Parents for Peace in 2016 with my guy Mubin Shaikh and our brilliant executive director, Miriam Nadri Churchill. And here we are today. We could go to the next slide. These people may look familiar to you. Today, I'm so grateful to and so lucky and fortunate to have friends all over the world from every background you can imagine. And some of my dearest friends in my life are a Indian Muslim former jihadi guy and an Israeli psychologist. And together, we're very happy to bring these stories to you. So thank you all for listening to my story. And I'll turn it back to our fearless leader.
Thank you so much, Arno, and thank you, Jerry Seinfeld. Okay, going from one to the other. What you're going to find out is I'm not the interesting one in the room as we're going through this. Mubin,
Hello.
come on, tell us your story.
Okay, I always begin with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, or as you say, Bishem Elohim ar-Rahman ar-Rahum. And now repeat after me, Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Okay, if you guys need to go to Chabad and Shul to brush up on it, please do.
No,
okay?
if you're going to try to speak Hebrew to him, like really fast, like an Israeli, he's going to fail.
אני
So,
לא
you know.
מדבר עברית. No. No, thank you very much for having us. My name is Mubin. You heard a little bit about my story. So that's me. Record scratch. How did I get here? So very quickly, I'll just, I'm born and raised in Toronto, Canada. My parents are from India. One of the things that people who come from different communities, they replicate some of their institutions that they do. So I went to Quran school from the age of 5. And this was, boys sitting on the floor at wooden benches, rocking back and forth, and reciting the Quran, but not understanding what we were reading. Because Indians, Arabic is not our first language. And so we learned how to recite for the ritualistic purposes. I made this joke yesterday at the Chabad event about, you know how to read the Hebrew proper, and then you read the English transliteration to sound out the Hebrew, right? Because the sounding out of that is what you need for your prayer purposes, right? So we do the same thing. So juxtapose that with a public school that I would go to as a kid. It was a caring, nurturing environment. The Quran school was very abusive. You got beaten if you made mistakes. He was very sadistic, the teacher who was there. Boys and girls were mixing in this environment versus over there, no mixing. I mean, the Orthodox way. And this public school secular community gave me a whole other way of viewing the world and the experiences that I was getting. I got to high school and I wasn't bullied, I wasn't picked on, I wasn't the victim of racism or any other ism. We were actually the cool kids of school. My friends had a rock band, and we weren't even old enough to drink in the bars, and yet they were winning these battle of the bands. And it was like a cliche high school life in one sense. Like, we were really the cool kids of school. And one of the things I learned from my non-Muslim friends is this concept of a house party. And unfortunately for me, well, my dad being the grown adult that he is, and now I totally understand being a father of kids. And what my dad did was he asked his brother to check on the house while he was gone. So unfortunately for me, in the middle of the party, my uncle burst through the door and caught me red-handed. And I almost peed myself, and he slapped me in front of everybody. And I can go back to that time, and I remember this one girl walking by, holding a 6-pack of bottles, mouthing, "I'm sorry," that she was leaving. So basically, what happened was I was shamed and guilted into believing that I had done something so horrific. I had defiled the home, I had dishonored the family. And so I decided I would get religious to make amends, going from like pulling a complete 180-degree turn. So in the summer of 1995, when I was 19, I would end up going to India and Pakistan. In Pakistan, I was sent to a city called Quetta, which is in the federally administered tribal areas. In Quetta, I would end up having a chance encounter with the Taliban that was there. And I became enamored by them. I wanted to be like them. I wanted to join them. I started to dress like them. I started to talk like them, cutting off people that I used to know before. You're kuffar. I can't talk to you people. You're out, right? I'm very hateful towards everything and everybody now. I was telling the story about when I would take the bus. Just before the bus turned into the bus station, there's a synagogue. And I fantasized about blowing up the synagogue. And the synagogue was next to a police station, so deterrence factor very high, right? And I did eventually, actually, I was gonna say, I mean, there's a Channel 12, Israel Channel 12 news clip of me at the synagogue meeting the rabbi. We did a whole thing, just where I was and where I am now. But so this was the
Wait, but
mentality.
Mubin, that was post October 7th, and what
Yes.
really stayed with me is the fact that the rabbi said you're the first Muslim who came to Same after
Yeah.
October 7th.
Yeah, I made that comment. So basically, what had happened was it was about at least a year after the October 7 attacks, and we did some filming, and then I went to the synagogue and I met with him, and I'm good with everybody, and he did say that to me that Mubin, the Muslim community, that before October 7 we were meeting with them and do the Ramadan iftar and this, that, and the other, and then boom, just like that, no emails replied to again. Never heard from anybody. You're the first one, he said. And so anyways, I thought about traveling to join foreign conflicts. I thought about Chechnya at the time. There was an insurgency going on there. The first jihadi videos came out at that time in the mid '90s. It was attacking Russian soldiers, basically. The second Intifada kicked off in 2000, right? And so these were the things that were animating my worldview. You heard in my story that 9/11, when the 9/11 attacks happened, that's what really made me reconsider my commitment to the cause and really put a big question mark in my head. And I'll come back to the October 7th thing because that was the other event that did a similar thing to me. Where on 9/11, I thought to myself, I studied the religion, this and that, but flying planes into buildings? Like, where did I not read that? You know, and so that's what prompted me to go to Syria. This was in 2002, before the war, before it was crazy to say, I'm going to Syria. But I went there for 2 years. I studied Arabic and Islamic studies. I was introduced to the Sufis while I was there. That's really mostly the reason I am the way that I am, and how I came out of that. And I described like the Sufis, very similar to Chabad and Kabbalah people. Our Abjadiyya, we call it in Arabic, the numerology for the lesser sophisticated. Um, and the Sufis are like the Jedi of the Muslim world, you know, and these Wahhabis and Salafis, they're like the Sith. Best analogy to use. All this stuff that you see, all the political Islamists, all these people out in the streets, you know, using public prayer as a to flex, all of them come from this interpretation. Like there is something, you know, poisoned about them when it comes to that. I'll just say that. So I spent 2 years. I realized my interpretations were wrong. I came back to Canada, and can I get the next slide, please? And as soon as I got back, I have to tell the backstory. The first Canadian had been arrested on terrorism charges. Momin Khawaja was arrested in connection with the 2004 London fertilizer bomb plot, a year before the underground bombings. Momin Khawaja, so he appears in the newspaper like arrested, blah, blah, blah. And I recognize him. And I saw a reference to the Canadian Security Intelligence Service in the article. For some of you folks, you remember those crazy days when there were these things called phone books that had everybody's names, addresses, and phone numbers on every street corner, pretty much. I saw a reference to the Intel service. I called them up and I said, hey, I know this guy. It turns out I went to Quran school with him, and he used to sit to the left of me. We played Hot Wheels cars together, the rubber WWF, now WWE action figures. And so that's what got the Intel service to get interested in me, to say, oh, really? You know this guy. We want to talk to you. You know, so they came, they talked to me, they recruited me. I became an undercover. I infiltrated infiltrating terrorist groups. Different plots were, so it's, I have to mention this because the intelligence service does the security intelligence, the RCMP, which is the federal police, the Mounties, the guys who ride horses. I mean, they don't, but you know, they make for a good postcard. Everybody knows that in the Red Surge, but they're like our FBI, if you will. Here in the US, the FBI does both components. So so these intelligence cases don't make it into the public eye. But the one case that I ended up working on became a criminal investigation. A bunch of guys got arrested. 18 guys were arrested in what came to be known as the Toronto 18 plot, terrorist plot, where they were plotting catastrophic bomb attacks in civilian areas in downtown Toronto. So they got arrested. There was 4 years of court. I was done in 2010. 2011, I got out. I was on social media at the time, Facebook and Twitter. Extremism, already we see it abounding. By 2012, I start to see the rise of ISIS in real time. I'm debating with them, I'm arguing with them, trolling them. The US government sees what I'm doing, and that's what you heard from the bio. They got in touch with me. They did it real professional. Like, they flew me to DC. We went to the State Department building into an office room, and then we talked. And so from 2012 to 2020, regarding anti-ISIS activities, some guys we tracked and some guys got whacked. From 2016, I've been working with Parents for Peace, doing these high-profile cases of extremism and terrorism. I think, oh yeah, okay, thank you. That's the last slide. This is for the New York State Police. We've also actually been working with Combat Anti-Semitism movement. They've been doing a lot of good stuff, and this is part of the training for law enforcement that we do through them, as Arno mentioned to you, that we do as well on our own. I'll kind of leave it at this, I think, and I'll turn it back over to you, just in terms of the cases that we deal with, and how do you deal with the anti-Semitism that's coming up. One of the things that we found, and we'll talk about, I have to drop it here, because we're working on a specifically countering anti-Semitism program called the AIR program, which is Anti-Semitism Intervention Rehabilitation Program or Response Program.
Recovery.
Recovery, it's one of the R's.
Because you're stealing
Um,
my thunder and talking about it.
okay, it's that new that I don't even know it exactly. But the point is that a lot of our cases, anti-Semitic beliefs are part across the spectrum. As you've heard, it's the connective tissue between extremist groups. We'll see the white supremacist wannabe talking about how he hates Jews, and of course, we're going to hear the Muslim supremacist talking about how he hates Jews. And there are certain techniques that we use. I mean, I'll just give a, like, because I really think this is the hardest work when you're, how do you develop rapport with a 16-year-old kid, juvenile, who his life is crappy and he thinks the Jews are responsible for it. So there are some things that we've been trying to put out there. And one of my favorite examples to use is I tell him, I said, hey, what do you think about this Muslim general? And this Muslim general has this physician, close confidant of his, who's a Jew. He's not just any, he picked the Jew over a Muslim. And he's not just any Jew, he's a rabbi. What do you think of this Muslim general? He says, kafir. He's out of Islam. The one who sits with the kafir, he is a kafir, like infidel. I said, well, that's interesting. I'm talking about Salah ad-Din, and the rabbi is Maimonides. So come again? So it's just to show them that a lot of times they just don't know. There's a lot of ignorance. And part of the reason why we do what we do is to push back against that and to shed some light in the darkness that they're experiencing.
Mubin, you have one more.
Oh, on the October 7th thing. So very quickly, after October 7, I saw the videos that the Israeli government later collected and showed to the media people. Horrific, just like ISIS videos. They're exactly like ISIS videos. It was so bad that even the former head of Sharia studies at Gaza Islamic University wrote a fatwa against Hamas because of what they did. Because I thought, oh, now we're kidnapping babies? Now we're burning families alive in their homes? Like, I know that that's not allowed. That's explicitly prohibited. You know, you cannot say Bismillah and eat pork. Doesn't make it kosher or halal. Can't do that. So I was really bothered by it. And this is, another reason why we're doing what we're doing is just because of the seeming insanity that has developed after October 7. That you would have thought that after an attack like that, people would at least to say, okay, we don't burn babies. Is that like too low of a bar for us to get people to agree to? And sadly, it's even difficult for people to say that. They feel this need to go into whataboutism. Well, what about? Well, what about? So hopefully we can talk about some strategies to kind of counter some of that. Thank you. You can move it to the next slide. I think it will show Miri's name. There you go.
Thank you. Round of applause to Mubin. So I will say that my story or my link is also connected to October 7th. So for me, and I don't know how many of you in the room can connect to this idea, but when people ask me to describe myself, my initial instinct is to say before or after October 7th, because I feel like my identity completely changed. So if you ask me who I was before October 7th, I would say I'm a mom, I'm a wife, I'm a psychologist, I'm Israeli. But my connection to 9/11 is that my husband lost his father in 9/11. He was one of the victims. I grew up during the second Intifada. Mubin, we have so many connections with our history. It's crazy. I'm an immigrant. I moved here for my doctorate. I'm a secular Jew. There are many, many ways to describe who I was. Those are my kids, Noam and Arya, and they're part of my story. So Noam and Arya, when Noam was 10 months old, we discovered he has a very rare condition called sublutic stenosis. He had to go through emergency surgery to save his life. Arya, when she was 15 months old, had exactly the same situation, only during COVID. And we spent about a month in the PICU. And my instinct, so as a psychologist, I'm very aware, too aware sometimes, to what's going on for me. And I was on a fight, flight, freeze response. And when you think about trauma is a loss of control, literally from the brain down, top down. So I was doing. And doing is the best antidote for trauma. So while my babies were intubated or were in induced coma for over a week, I was writing a whole journal and a workbook for parents who were in a similar situation that go through the PICU. And that was then published at MGH, and they're using it in a PICU for parents with similar situation. They're fine. They're super cute when they want to be. This is Luna. They're all okay. They're thriving. But what happened from that is that I started doing a lot of stuff, and I became the co-chair of the Parent Family Advisory Committee. I won an Ether Dome Challenge. I did training for the PICU so them can understand what parents in my situation felt. I was doing and doing and doing, and it was all out of that initial fear response. I had exactly the same feeling on October 7th. When October 7th happened, I had that fight, flight, fear response. I was feeling completely traumatized, and I realized I have to do something. And I love this quote: "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing will be changed without being faced," by Baldwin. So I started doing again. On October 7th, and some of you in the room might remember this ridiculous idea that I had, I wrote a post on an Israeli Facebook group saying, "I'm a trauma expert. Here is my cell phone number. If you need support, call me." Not my brightest moment. I got flooded with phone calls on October 7th and beyond, but I was very fortunate that a lot of people in our community stepped up with amazing psychologists and social workers. And I was able to, we kind of formed a team that we gave free support for the Israeli community for over a year for free. And then expanded to the Jewish community. What came out of it is I started hearing those stories that were really similar to the stories I've been hearing from my patient before October 7th. Actually, until June of this year, I was a director of intensive outpatient program at Boston Child Study Center for over 7 years. And there's this concept that's called traumatic invalidation. I did not coin this. It's a known phenomenon in the trauma world that was coined by Dr. Marsha Linehan and Dr. Melanie Arnay. And it's that feeling when you're sharing your experience or your feelings or your thoughts, and the environment or caregiver or people you care about are telling you, it's not a big deal. Or what about? Or did you think about the other side? Or minimizing it. So I started collecting all those stories, and a bunch of those psychologists and social workers would meet every week to process how we're feeling. And I keep hearing that from them as well, that it's a known phenomena for Jewish people after October 7th. So I wrote an article with Dr. Jackie Wolfman, and basically in the article we proved that the Jewish community post-October 7th meet all 9 criteria for traumatic invalidation. That's a lot to be meeting all of them. And by the way, there's a new article coming out, and just to give you a little bit of a heads up about it, we actually did a new study with the Jewish Community Mental Health Initiative, and we proved that the scale for traumatic invalidation is highly correlated with PTSD symptoms, anxiety symptoms, depression symptoms. And even if you're resilient, it doesn't counter that. Meaning there are significant mental health aspects that come with feeling this social trauma, this gaslighting feeling. So I started giving talks, a lot of talks, and then more talks. Miriam heard me in one of my talks, and Miriam Churchill that Arno mentioned before, and she said, "You don't need to fight alone. Come join us." And I did, and it was the best decision. And I have this collage of things here, not for, hey, look at me, this is what I'm doing. I have it for a very specific reason. So through this process, and after joining Parents for Peace, so the article, for example, it is now ranked as the top 1% most read article in the United States. It's being used in courts, in schools to prove harm. It got a real effect. I won the Shine the Light Award. I was recently one of J100. I did all of those talks with the mayor, which was amazing, in New Orleans, and we do stuff with ISC and the State House. We had a special commission to combat anti-Semitism, and Arno, Mubin, and Miriam also talked there. But with all of those doing, and my parents are here from Israel, and they're constantly, "You're doing too much. Stop. Polania." But what I think people didn't understand is that gave me the fuel. That helped me combat my own trauma. That feeling that I'm moving the needle, even a little bit. I'm getting one email or a few emails of "thank you, we read your article, it made a change." When we're doing, the 3 of us doing talks, I'm energized. There's this word in Hebrew, natan, and you spell it forward and backward the same way, nun taf nun. Because when you give, you get. And I'm getting so much of working with these amazing individuals who are my upstanders, not just bystanders, because you guys, when the MTA stuff happened. So here's another fun story. So during my testimony in the State House, I was going against the Massachusetts Teacher Association. So some of you are aware what's been going on. For those of you who are not aware, you should Google what's been happening in K-12. So for some people, it did not go very well, and people started bashing me. And Arno went on the radio, and Arno, share with them, what did you say?
First of all, anybody who's ever messing with Miri, they're going to have to go through us two first, just so you know. And to that point, it was brought to my attention that the Massachusetts Teachers Association was providing resources to discuss Palestine to their members that included Magan Davids made of folded up dollar bills and things like a really kind of scary comic book stylized snake with his tongue out like this, and a hand was grabbing the tongue, and a knife was coming to cut the tongue off. And above it said F-U-C-K Zionists. This is what K-12 teachers are given to distribute to our children. And I was stunned because both of these pieces of content and countless other ones, these are two of many, many disgusting examples, would have been very much at home in my neo-Nazi propaganda 30 years ago. So I called into the radio show to make that point.
He totally did. Okay, go to the next slide. Oh, yeah. He deserves that. Okay, so we're going to talk about addressing anti-Semitism. We're going to put a quick plug in because then I actually want to ask them some questions. This is one of the examples where we're doing training. This was in Temple Bet Elohim. Go to the next one, please. We touched upon it a little bit. Why do we care so much about anti-Semitism? It's really not just because I'm Jewish. For me, and you can see it in this diagram over here. I mean, we work with every single ideology, with Islamists, with far left, with far right, with Antifa, with eco-terrorism. And over 70% of the phone call we're getting for our helpline have anti-Semitic content. And I would love for both of you to share in a second some of the stories of how anti-Semitism really doesn't affect just Jews. The fact that it's really impacting all life. Some of the things that have been mentioned before from our AIR project is direct service awareness. We have a designated helpline now for anti-Semitism. We're developing curriculum, training, and specific intervention to address both anti-Semitism and extremism. So you both talked about what drove you to hate, and both of you, I know in the past you mentioned every radicalization is very individual. Every story is different, but yet we also talk about how anti-Semitism is the connective tissue. Can you talk about the role of hate from perspective of belonging, meaning, and identity, and why is it connected?
One of the many things that make Parents for Peace unique amongst other organizations in the counter-violent extremism space is that we treat hate as an addiction. You'll recall in my story, I talked about how antisocial behavior and addiction to that led me to an addiction to hate. And when you're addicted to hate, it serves the same function that alcohol and other drugs would do. If there's I love country music, and there's the old country music cliche, like the guy crying in his beer at the bar, drinking his woman away, and yeah, he might get so drunk that he forgets about it for an hour, but the next morning he wakes up and it's 50 times worse. But hate serves that same sort of numbing and distracting role to people who have unresolved trauma and suffering in their life when other things in their life aren't working out well. Hate allows them to distract themselves from these real dire issues and feel the sensation of identity, purpose, and belonging simply by scrolling down a screen and hating other people.
So I want to stay with that, and Mubin, I wonder what you think about that concept. When you think of vulnerability, Arno, you touched before about the role of trauma, for example, right? And how, as a trauma therapist, I'm thinking there is two different sides to trauma, and if you go to one narrative and you can help someone find meaning, connection, belonging, and you save them. On the other hand, what happens on the other side? Especially if you can focus on adolescents, for example. How do they fall into extremism, vulnerability factors with that, from that lens of trauma informed, as I like to say?
Yeah. Yeah, I think, I mean, ultimately, the whole trauma-informed perspective is about having a good situational awareness of the person, where they're coming from, what they've potentially probably gone through. We receive the individual of concern. Unfortunately, sometimes, I guess we could say in hindsight, it could have been prevented, even that kid coming to us in that particular context. There's a number of layers that you can look at. You can look at and consider their family upbringing, what they've gone through, what kind of upbringing they went through. And again, like, the 16-year-old high school girl said that not all hurt people hurt people. There are people who have, many other adverse childhood experiences, and for whatever reason, they're able to be more resilient than others, and some others, they're, not so much. So I think family and environmental vulnerabilities is something to consider as they kind of go through their developmental stages. So if you think about juveniles and how much, first, their brains are physically still developing, right? So they're like, I was saying one time to my wife, I was like, it's like talking to the dog, okay? It's like, there's like 8 brain cells, 4 of them relate to eating, 2 is pooping, and so their brains are physically developing, right? And in this developmental stage, when you are hurtling at great speed, highly complex ideas and concepts, literally through a screen into their brains, they might be wearing headphones or whatever. It's changing their brain chemistry is what's happening. We will discover this. I mean, we will admit it maybe in 15, 20 years when the CEOs of the tech companies are dead so that we can't sue them. We'll learn that social media has been literally poisoning the brain chemistry of our children. And we can see that's what ends up happening. So in terms of those vulnerabilities that are present in that young person's life, add to that an aggravating factor of social media, which amplifies the extremism. A lot of times introduces them to, in the beginning, I didn't think that self-radicalization was a thing. The common understanding was that people are radicalized and they go online to seek out validation of their radicalization. But I actually saw a contradiction with this when I was undercover with the group. One of the guys that we were trying to recruit, we gave him a jihadist CD. It was a collage of all the suffering that was happening in the Muslim world, and getting you triggered through emotion, and to the point where the kid, when he took it back, his mother found it, and they both watched it, and the mother was like, oh my God, whatever these guys want you to do with them, go and join them. Like, this was a mother who had started off with, oh no, no, blah, 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 and then the imagery and videos got her. So that's the aggravating factor of social media, manipulated imagery. And unfortunately, and adults are succumbing to this. Our kids seem to have no chance against it.
Why Jews?
Yeah, why not Jews, right? I mean, I think it's become very easy for people because, there are many ways to look at it, right? Like, why? Why are they picking on these, like, few million people and who just want to have a little beachside property in this larger, desert area? And I think, there's so many things. I'm sure, you've heard all the different things, the resilience, the rich history. I was actually CEO when you were coming up. I looked at the time, and it was like 2 minutes after 7. And I thought to myself, you see, this is why the Jews beat Muslims, because you're on time. There's a thing called Muslim Standard Time. Like, when they say come at this time, but nobody comes at that time. And we know that happens, but bravo. I looked at my watch and I said 7:02. Yeah. So it's things like that. And I think at the end of the day, what it is a jealousy that people have. They don't like the fact that, look how successful these people are. They're very studious. That's their thing, right? Very studious people. And you can't do that. You're too dumb or lazy, maybe both at the same time, to do that for yourself. And you don't like the fact that you're seeing it in those people who, as far as you're concerned, they shouldn't be there. I am the better than them. Why are they here? No, no, no. Right? And so they become the target for what the person themselves are lacking in their own life.
That envy part is huge. And I think I'm ashamed to say as a human being that humanity has become habituated to Jew hatred. And this goes back to 3,000 years even. And it's been transmorgifying,
Sure.
transmorphing.
It changed.
It's been changing. There's a good word. In the early areas of Jew hatred, in the Christian age, Jews were hated for killing Jesus. And then we get to the late 19th century, up to the Holocaust. Jews were hated because they were seen as not white. They were seen as racially impure. Nowadays, and we live in this age of a horribly false, oppressor binary. Jews are now cast as the white oppressors. Never mind that 80 years ago, 6 million Jews were slaughtered because they were seen to be not white. But that's a that's a demonstration of how Jew hatred has been transforming for thousands of years. And as a society, I think accelerated by our addiction to screens and the tendency that screens have to transmit not just misinformation, but disinformation. And that creates, I think, the perfect storm of Jew hatred that we're tragically seeing today.
That's a really good point. And Dr. Neil Eckert actually talks about the 3 changes through the era, how every era Jews have to violate one of the society values: religion, race, human rights this day, right? But you can't call it anti-Semitism, so we switch it to anti-Zionism. So Arno, I'm going to continue with you because you've been doing a lot of work at schools. What do schools or institutions in general, what do they get wrong? What should they do? What are they missing? Give us some advice.
To put it very simply, which you probably gathered is not my strong suit by now, what I believe needs to happen at schools, and this is really evidenced by these culture wars that have been happening for the past couple decades, where the far right and the far left are both tearing each other to pieces, complete ignorance of their symbiosis, how they fuel each other, over the control of what is taught to children. And in the midst of all these culture wars, the solution is obfuscated. And I believe the solution is rather than teaching children what to think, we need to teach them how to think. And thank you. Unfortunately, that is lost in an era where certainly public unions of K-12 educators have a self-declared mission to radicalize our children. And this is incredibly toxic, incredibly offensive. My child is 33 years old, so she's done with the K-12 process. But I think it's as offensive to me for a teacher to proudly proclaim that their mission is to radicalize children as it would be if a teacher was handing out crack cocaine. Because radicalization takes over a human life the same way addiction to crack cocaine does. When you are radicalized, nothing matters but your cause. You are no longer an individual. You are no longer Bob Smith or Mary Fulton, whoever you are. You're not that individual. You are simply a warm body fighting and dying for a cause. And to me, I'm hard-pressed to think of a more horrific fate to doom our children to.
And that's such an interesting point, because one of the things, and we talked a little bit about the vulnerability of the developed brain, when you have a teenager especially, and Mubin, you touched about it in your story, They're already vulnerable just because they're teenagers, because their brain is not fully developed. They don't know how to think in critical way. Everything is black and white. But it's also a time in their identity when they're trying to figure out who's in their group, who's the social group, and being independent from their parents. Now, if you have one of those kiddos and at the same time, maybe they're bullied, maybe they don't have great social skills, maybe they're the outcast, and now you have a group of other people telling them, I will give you meaning, I will give you a sense of belonging, I'll be your family, and I will give you something to do. Remember, doing, antidote for trauma. And then you start acting. So one of the things that we do with the K to 12 specifically and in higher education is that balance between not shaming people, never shame someone, not punishing right away, but having that balance between accountability and learning. Teaching, holding someone accountable, being curious, trying to figure out what is the function of the behavior. When we meet with with individuals concerns, and Mubin, maybe you can give an example of how we do it, we never go into, let's argue about the ideology, or you shouldn't be doing that, you're a horrible person. We lead in with curiosity, and we're trying to understand what's behind it. Maybe you can share like a short anecdote, and then we go to the next question.
Well, I was going to share the example from okay, I could do it. So yeah, it's I think like there's a lot of things going through my brain. It's just those techniques of engaging with people. I mean, like my skills have been sharpened over years and different fields in which they've been applied. The spy world really taught me very well to engage with people and make me think I'm your buddy, and if you're up to no good, I'm going to find out your plans.
He's also known as the Muslim James Bond.
Oh yes,
He's actually, there is an exhibition about him in
In
DC.
Washington, D.C. Spy Museum, there is an exhibit on this guy.
Yeah, say hello. It's on the 4th floor when you go by. Yeah, it's so just in terms of developing rapport with people, and even like I could use the similar example with Arno when he was pulling out a guy from the KKK who really hated Muslims because he deployed to Iraq and his friend got killed in Iraq, like in front of him. Like he was holding his brain in his hands and stuff, and it was horrible. And then anyway, so he really hated Muslims because of that. We got a case recently, like it was like 2 weeks ago, I think. Young girl, 16, father's Lebanese Shia, mother's Pakistani Sunni, right? Sunni and Shia is sushi, right? The Lebanese father is chill, the mom's not chill. The mom's like, and she just doesn't want anything to do with that stuff, And so for both of them, for the ex-KKK guy and for this girl, they come on and then I just said, I'm like, those goddamn Muslims, eh? She was just like, yes. Look, you have to engage people like this. I'll give you another example just to illustrate the point of even just fomenting critical thinking skills. A very quick one. When my son came to me about Andrew Tate, he said to me, the misogynist. He's a misogynist, creepy dirtbag. What else do you need to know?
Trying to keep it PG-13.
Yeah. There's no kids here, right? Oh, okay. Anyways, so my kid comes up to me and he says, "Oh, come on, Dad." He's like, Andrew Tate's done all wrong. And I said to him, I was like, well, we have now about not debating ideology and how to engage with people. So I knew exactly what was happening. I could have said, that guy, he's a creep, he's a loser. Isn't he up on charges? But my approach was, I said, we have a saying, even a broken clock is right 2 times a day. Okay? So by giving that example, the kid gets the point right away that, okay. And then I said to him, how does this guy model the thing that he's trying to claim that he's going to teach you? So to be an alpha man. I'm like, do you see him being a father to his kid, being a husband to his wife? He's got 3D printed Barbies around him and leased luxury vehicles. Like, what is that teaching you? Like, so you see, I didn't need to. I just said, well, look at what this guy produces. The saying, by their fruits you shall know them, right? So you just got to point a lot of times to, and I'll close with this, and this is one of the most effective techniques that we use, where what we do is we highlight for the person, how their life is like garbage living this way. Like we can point to their life and say, I know, because we have a case consult every week. We go over some of our cases, and Arno was saying about the guy. He's like, it's because women. Like he was an insult guy. He was like, basically, he's not getting any dates, whatever. Everything is horrible. It's all women's fault. And it's like, dude, take a shower. Like, start with the basics, right? So to highlight for them in their life why
Chicks
this.
dig hygiene.
Yeah, can confirm. Can confirm. So just some examples.
Thank you. Okay, last question. We'll open it up. I'm going to try. So, Arno and Mubin, one of the things they appreciate is new questions. So, I'm trying to challenge myself over here. Okay? Pausing. Okay. So, as both of you know, my big thing is post traumatic growth. I don't like stopping just with resiliency. Most of us in this room are resilient, meaning we have the ability to bounce back when something bad is happening to us. Post-traumatic growth is different. It's when you transform, when you learn that there is a trauma and you're not erasing the trauma, you're living with the trauma and you become something better. So, for example, the hostages that came back, if you hear their talks, most of them are having post-traumatic growth. I can't remember which one it was. I listened to him in the ISC, and he was saying how, of course, I didn't want this to happen to me. And it happened, and I radically accepted, and I'm a better person right now. The amount of strength that comes with it is amazing. So PTG is really about the journey that you're going through. Think about like a butterfly, right? And you have to become a cocoon to completely change who you were in order to rise up as a butterfly. So here we go. What is your, as you moved out of extremism, what is your PTG moment?
That is a new question.
Yes.
Thank you. Let's give it up for the new question, everybody. Thank you so much. After 16 years of getting the same questions over and over and over and over again, I just have a thing for new questions. So my post-traumatic growth moment, is this like when I realized I had experienced it, or?
Well, it's really the transformation. But if you think about it, if you have a specific moment where you're like, okay, this is it. Like I have this trauma. I carry it with me. I'm not erasing it, but I became a butterfly. What is your butterfly moment?
My butterfly moment is certainly in 2009 when I was attending University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee for my third failed attempt at a degree. And there was a meditation and wellness class at the Shambhala Center. And my daughter, for whatever reason, had been interested in Buddhism since 6th grade. And she always like, Dad, I want to be a Buddhist and I want to go meditate at a Buddhist temple. And I didn't know anything about Buddhism other than it was about suffering. And I'm like, I suffer enough. Why? I don't need a religion about suffering. Like, what a dumb thing. And I took this class anyway when I finally had an opportunity to literally enlighten myself. And at this point, to give you a time frame, I left hate groups in 94, went on my rave bender from like 96 to 2001 or so, quit drinking in 2004, started writing in 2007 as like real catharsis to try to reconcile my past. And just the process of writing really helped a lot, but I still felt so horrible about all the harm that I had done. And let me be clear about this. I've done ridiculous amounts of harm to innocent people. Beyond that horrible music I put out, which is still out there, it's me screaming at people to go and kill each other because of the color of their skin. I hurt people with my bare hands. I did incredible harm to innocent people. I did a lot of harm to my family, did a lot of harm to the world, and I did a lot of harm to myself. And I didn't know how to reconcile that harm. And I had this really ridiculous idea that I could somehow just never forgive myself. I'm like, I will never forgive myself for the harm that I've done, and that will be my way to honor the people that I hurt. I will honor them by just keeping this little nugget of hatred against myself. And when I sat down to meditate, and I've been doing it ever since then, so 17 years now, I learned a meditation technique, and there's all kinds of different ways to meditate, but the one I learned was one of the simplest ones. In Tibetan, it's called Shine. In English, it's called peaceful abiding. And I sit down, I was on a cushion, I was doing it legit. The gong started it and everything. And I was taught by a meditation instructor who was taught in person by another meditation instructor who was taught by another person to person, oral tradition going back 2,500 years. And every word he had to say to teach me how to meditate, like, carried that weight with it. And it was very profound. And so I'm sitting there on the meditation cushion and I'm focusing on my breath. And when I'm focused on my breath for that split second, I'm not worrying about the future. I'm not regretting the past. I am completely present. And that is the objective of meditation, is just to be present and to practice doing that. As with any other practice, the more you practice, the more you normalize that thing in your life. Now, our minds being as they are, I sit down to meditate. I'm like, okay, there's my breath. I'm meditating. All right, awesome. I'm really hungry. After this, I'm going to get a double cheeseburger with the works from Cops. That's my burger joint in Milwaukee. It's phenomenal. And then I'm like, wait, that's not what I'm here to do. I'm going to release the thought of the Cops double cheeseburger with the works, and I'm going to release it gently. So I'm practicing gentleness. I'm not going to judge the thought. So I'm practicing non-judgment.
This is called mindfulness.
Exactly. And I forgive myself for this thought intruding upon my meditation practice. So I'm practicing forgiveness, and I'm practicing kindness to myself. And for a split second, I'm back on my breath again. And then I'm like, oh, that jerk cut me off on the way here today. That was bad. What? Repeat the process. That's what meditation is. Over and over and over again, practicing presence, gentleness, non-attachment, non-judgment, kindness, forgiveness, all very worthy things to practice. And toward the end of that 10-minute session of my first meditation session of my life, it occurred to me that this grudge I held against myself for all the harm that I had done was literally constructed of the same mental raw material as the thought of the double cheeseburger with the works. So if I can work with one, it's a proof of concept that I can work with the other. And at that moment, I realized not self-forgiveness. I didn't like leap off the meditation cushion and be like, hey, I forgive myself. Glad that's over. Like, cool. I got up off the cushion and I said, self-forgiveness is possible. It's a journey that I'm beginning today. And it's a journey that I'm still on and I'm going to be on for the rest of my life. But the farther I go on this journey, the less hatred and loathing I have for myself, and the more effective I become at talking to families and individuals of concern, because I really don't have any business talking to some kid who needs to begin a self-forgiveness journey if I'm not on that journey myself. Awesome question, Miri.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
I can't really think of, for me, leaving the extremism side. I guess it would have been, after 9/11, and I'm just trying to answer that question, because what ended up happening was, with going to Syria, coming back, and then becoming operational, then that created a whole other identity for me, because when it became a court case, my identity and my activities were exposed to the public. And the Muslim community was not happy. They were very upset. The non-Muslim community was like, in Canada especially, where it's like, jihadists? Really? Who wants to hurt Canada? And like, it's true, but at the same time, very naive as well. And that was 20 years ago, and we're still dealing with that, right? We're still dealing with Islamist kind of attacks in the country. I'm sure all of you are tracking what happened in the UK, right? Elderly man, middle-aged guy just stabbed randomly in the street, right? They put the terrorism label to it because of the links to the Iranian regime proxy groups. And so now you see what's happening is they're committing attacks just like ISIS is doing, right? Or had done. In fact, on top of on the regime's proxy attacks, ISIS was also putting out calls to attack Jews at their religious places during their religious holidays, right? Nothing came out of that first, the recent holiday cluster, but it reminds us that you have to be on point for future ones. But what ended up happening is when my identity got exposed and I was the undercover, and I just had to deal with so much crap from so many different places. And it was at the end of it, when the court case was done and the judge validated me, and basically because everybody was questioning accusing me of all sorts of intentions, motivations, and so on. And basically the judge said that no, this guy was like, Mubin Shaikh exhibited a great number of hallmarks of a truthful and credible witness. And that's all I needed to hear. And like everybody else can, you know what they can go do. Yeah. So, because it's weird. Like this is a good question. Obviously, it is definitely new, and it's just I'm because things have continued to happen. You know, and okay, I'll mention this. Sorry to get heavy. Okay, it's cool. I'm okay. I went through sexual abuse when I was a child. Okay, I know even way back when why I joined martial arts. I told myself nobody will ever do that to me again. I made sure that I was a very proficient fighter and so on and so forth. And even recently, like my own brain has played with me. They're like, oh, you know, look at you. You know what I mean? This is all these things that have happened to you. You know what I mean? Blah, blah, blah. Just messing with my head. Now it's been a month. A month ago, so my friend, very like he's like so close of a friend, we call him my cousin. Well, his older brother used to assault me often when I would go to see him. So life goes on, da da da, this and that, you know, and I'm cool. Like I've told my kids about it. Like I made so they know that hey, don't ever let anybody treat you like this. Well, a month ago, my friend's brother got arrested for sexually assaulting a coworker, coerced sexual assault of a coworker, and it came up in the media. And my dad called me and said, "Hey, Mubin, did you see what happened? Or he got arrested?" And I said, ah, ha, ha, ha. I started laughing. And my dad says, hey, don't be a child, you know. And he said like, and then I didn't even, it just happened. And like, I was like, hey, he raped me. And then I realized, oh shit, I dropped a big one on my dad there, and it was like a pause. And I was like, ee. So I'm saying all this because that just happened a month ago. And the fact that it came up in the news, like I was done with it. I'm on my life. I've continued on with my life. But the fact that it came up in the paper and now everybody's messaging me, not because they know what he did to me, because he's in the family network. And there was an expectation that my dad was going to help him. And I told my dad, I said, don't go near that case. Don't touch it. So post-traumatic growth, I know, I'm sorry you wanted the new question?
Can we have a round of applause, please?
Fantastic. So I think the takeaway is it's an ongoing process. And there are going to be points that you're going to get triggered on because something happened from the past, something happened from the thing. Your brain should just be like, okay, what am I going to be doing, down the road from now? I'm going to get through this. Watch how I shine when I'm over there. So.
And that moment was part of their post-traumatic growth journey, because I don't think I ever heard you going into those details.
Yeah.
Amazing. Okay, how did we do?
Thank you, Mubin. I've seen videos of some very anti-Semitic distortions coming out of mosques, some quite extreme. And I just wanted to ask you, how common is it in mosques for the imams, the various preachers, to be preaching anti-Semitism?
In mosques, you have a lot of mosques that will talk openly like that. At the end of the day, what they know where the line is of what's legal and what's not legal. You have a First Amendment here. You have free speech. You're allowed to be a racist. You're allowed to say these things. I think a lot of these, Muslim organizations, publicly not so much. There are those that there are no guardrails. Let's say that, and they'll speak openly. Others try to be a little more careful because they don't want to end up on the news or on a memory clip, right? So I think it's increasing that rhetoric in mosques, but I think it's and I'll just end with this. I think you're not seeing as much in the mosques per se. You're seeing a lot more in Muslim associations on campus. That's where you're getting more of the radicalization and the mobilization. That's the most important thing. So.
Hi, thank you so much for speaking with us tonight and sharing your stories. It's been absolutely interesting and amazing. I was just wondering, you're dealing with families of a lot of families, and I was just wondering how your families reacted when you were extremists and what your relationship was like with your parents then or your families then and what it's like now at this point.
Yeah, that's a great question. My parents had completely lost control of me by the time I was about 15 years old. I was physically larger than my dad at that point. Growing up, I never had a lot of discipline. I certainly didn't have any physical discipline. A lot of people hear my story and they're like, you just needed a good whooping as a kid. And while I can't necessarily dispute that, I don't think violence is a good way to teach anybody anything, especially children. But my parents just had a real kind of laissez-faire approach to raising me, and I took full advantage of it. So when I was 15 years old, I basically told my parents, I said, I'm quitting school and I'm moving out of the house, and you can't stop me. And they tried. They tried to talk me. They tried to reason with me. They tried to yell at me. They tried to coerce me, and I was just beyond it all. And so finally, they were just in kind of damage control mode. And my mom was like, "Okay, well, we just have to make sure he doesn't starve." She helped me get a job. The Jewish boss who was kind to me was my mom's high school friend, and he's the guy who gave me that job, and that was really transformative for me. But my parents were well aware of my ideology. Anytime I saw them or anybody else, I was always spouting it. So they were crystal clear on that, but I don't think they had any inkling of exactly how bad it was. So as Lily had mentioned, I've authored 2 books. My first book is called My Life After Hate, and my second book I co-authored with a brilliant guy named Pardeep Singh Kalika. It's called Gift of Our Wounds. Pardeep's father, Satwant, was the last person murdered in the Sikh temple shooting of August 5th, 2012. And the perpetrator of that shooting was a guy from my old gang. So Pardeep and I met. We developed an amazing friendship, wrote that book together. I mentioned the books because my mom couldn't even read the first one, but she read the second one. And my dad read both of them. And both my mom and my dad were like, oh my God, I had no idea it was this bad. And I'm like, yeah, the books are just a wee glimpse. Like, that's not even all of it. But I think that's a common thing for parents. Like, you don't want to face the truth of how far off the rails your kids may have went. And there's an element of one degree or another of kind of putting your head in the sand and not being like, no, I'm a good kid. I'm a good kid. He's not going to do stuff like that. And my parents fell into that to one degree or another. But nowadays, both my parents are still with me, Baruch Hashem. My mom is disabled and I'm her caretaker. And I mean, she's a wonderful mom, and it's the least I could do after everything I put this poor woman through. My father is in Oregon. My brother lives close to him and takes care of him. Last week, I just went out to visit my dad and my brother and had an amazing week hanging out with them. But my dad's a fantastic man, and he's a hero of mine. And despite the struggles he went through as I was growing up, I really look up to him and admire him, and as well as my mom. So I'm very blessed to have the family that I do, and it's a reminder of how important family is. I shame myself thinking about this when I talk about what led me out, and I talk about the exhaustion and Seinfeld and my boss and everybody. I don't mention often enough that another huge factor in my favor was the fact that neither of my parents gave up on me. Both of them were disgusted and mortified at my beliefs, but they let me know on a regular basis that they loved me and they wanted me back. And if it wasn't for that dedication, if that ingredient may have been missing, I don't know that I would have been able to turn my life around. So I do owe that to them also.
Mubin, do you want to answer that same question? And then we'll have one more
Yeah,
question.
I'll keep it. They thought it was a phase that I was going through. It became real for me on the day of 9/11 when I rushed home during lunch to see what was happening on TV. I was at work at the time, and my wife turned around when I entered. She's like, "Hey," she goes, "like, you don't have anything to do with this, right?" And I was like, "What? Why would you say that?" She's like, "Because people are calling the house. They're calling us saying, 'Where's Mubin? What does he think about all of this?'" So, a lot of people thought it was a phase. They recognized that I was getting very serious, with the talk of trying to go overseas and stuff. But thankfully, after the attacks, it pushed me the other way. And so I ended up going away.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. You have my utmost gratitude, respect, and admiration. My question is, in your work for Parents for Peace, how do you measure success? And what percentage of time do you think you are successful?
Thank you, sir. That's one of my favorite questions. There's an NYPD cyber terror conference that I'm fortunate to speak at often, just about every year. And the last year I was there, we had a panel similar to this. You weren't there at that point. I've been there with Mubin before, and I don't think you were with us, Miri. But at the panel, someone from DHS was there, and he said, "Arno, how do you know when someone is de-radicalized?" And I just said, "I don't know." And I just let it hang there for a minute. And the guy who asked me the question is looking at me like I'm an idiot, and the whole audience is looking at me like, what? And I said, no, I don't know is the answer. Because when a person is radicalized, they are in ironclad binary thinking. Yes, no, black, white, good, evil, us, them. There's no nuance when you're radicalized. There's no grace to say, oh, I don't know. So to me, a litmus test of successful disengagement from violent extremist ideologies is if I can get that individual to a point where they're not only okay, but ideally comfortable with saying, I don't know. So if I say, what do you think about this issue? And they're like, you know what? I don't know. I need to learn more. I need to investigate. It replace that binary certainty with curiosity and a love for curiosity. That's when we know that we're getting out of the woods and getting into better territory. As far as the outcomes of our cases go, again, it's important to frame this in terms of recovery. When somebody is recovering from addiction, a relapse is part of that recovery process. For me, I had a relapse into hate on October 7th. I was so devastated by the barbarity and the cruelty of the attacks, and again, re-devastated and re-traumatized by half the world not only turning their back on the Israeli victims, but blaming the victims for this horror that had occurred to them. I hated Hamas, and I hated the IRGC and all the other proxies, and I hated all the useful idiots that were cheering them on around the world. And once again, it was the light that Jewish people shine upon the world that led me out of that relapse. I immersed myself in Jewish community every chance I got, not just attending conferences, which I did a ton of, but talking to Miri, talking to my Jewish friends, going to my local shul. And it was actually at a event they had there. There was a memorial for the Bibas family where I wasn't going to be like, oh, I'll go and do a talk. Like I was just going to be there with everyone there. And you could cut the suffering with a knife. You could tell how badly everyone was hurting, but there was not a shred of hate at that shul. There was not a shred of hate amongst all of the Jews I knew that I called to see how they were doing. None of them were demonstrating hate. And I'm a hate expert. I cultivated it for 7 years. I've been fighting it for 16 years. I know what hate looks like. And I'm not saying Jews are immune to hate. It's a very natural human thing to experience hate. But the Jews I have in my life set the example for me to not let hate grab you and lead you by the nose and control your actions. And for that, I'm entirely grateful. And as far as our cases go, we try to provide that same sort of mentorship and that same sort of role with all the cases that we have. Some of them, like, you think, hey, this case is great. The kid's doing way better. The mom's really happy. She said she had Christmas for the first time in 3 years. And then 2 months later, they're like, yep, we were unaware of all this stuff that was happening all along, and now they're right back to square one, and we got to get back to work. We have other cases where a disengagement sticks, and they go on without a relapse. So the majority of our cases are off-ramped with a positive outcome, and we're working hard to get to the point where hopefully all of our cases are like that.
Wow. So before I'm closing, I want to put one more plug for our new initiative, AIR. If you want to be partnering with us, we're piloting it in different schools. We're specifically now focusing on Massachusetts. So
What does AIR stand for?
Anti-Semitism, Intervention, Recovery. Recovery. Thank you so much for being with us today. Hold on. I have a good sentence for ending. Hold on. I want to leave you with hope, because this was very heavy. Radicalization doesn't happen overnight. It's a spectrum. It happens over time, which means we actually have a lot of ways to intervene. And prevention actually happens before violence happens. So if we have a community that is cultivating a sense of belonging, helping with resiliency, post-traumatic growth, right? Giving meaning to people and curiosity, then we're helping people out of the cycle already. That they might not need Parents for Peace at that point. So I'm going to challenge you, when you go back to your community, to your home, to your school, to your kids, be curious, be kind, give them a hug, tell them about us, but mostly reflect about for yourself as well. Thank you so much.